Now, I'm going to start this out by warning you that there will be some minor spoilers for the book Phasma in this video, and one of the main reasons why I'm warning you about that is because if you haven't read the book yet and you're interested in reading it, but you think it's going to be terrible because, well, the character has been terrible in the movies, I'm here to tell you that's not the case at all with this book. In fact, it's actually one of the best novels in the new canon, not only because it gives context to why Phasma so quickly and easily betrayed the First Order in The Force Awakens, when she of course lowered the shields to Starkiller Base, but because it turns her into one of the best, most well-defined new characters of the entire sequel trilogy era, which is of course ironic because in the movies, she's been nothing short of pointless, nothing short of a chrome stormtrooper inserted into these movies in an effort to try and sell toys to kids and collectors alike. And look, I wouldn't be overly upset about the underuse and or misuse of Captain Phasma if she'd just been like any other character casually introduced in the story. I mean, Star Wars movies are full of characters that sometimes get seconds of screen time, and maybe a line or two of dialogue at best, and no one ever really complains about them. The difference with Phasma, however, is that she was a huge part of the advertising campaign leading up to The Force Awakens. Her chrome likeness was absolutely everywhere. Not to mention, we were given the impression she would indeed be a big part of the story, that she'd be the first real female villain in a Star Wars movie, even though yes, we have gotten great female villains elsewhere in Star Wars. And sure, Phasma certainly isn't the first character to get a lot of hype leading up to a movie, but then ended up having a smaller role than we expected. Darth Maul, for example, was a big part of the advertising campaign leading up to Episode 1, and he ended up only getting 2 lines in that movie and no real story of his own. He was pretty much just there to partake in 2 cool-looking lightsaber battles and to kill Qui-Gon Jinn before being killed by Obi-Wan. But at least those 2 lightsaber battles, especially the second one, looked pretty damn epic. And again, he killed Qui-Gon, which meant Obi-Wan would then have to train Anakin, so he very much had a true place and purpose in that movie. He wasn't just there to sell toys, though I'm sure he sold his fair share. Boba Fett is another example of a character that got a ton of hype leading up to the release of The Empire Strikes Back, but really wasn't in the movie all that much. He was first seen in a cartoon that was part of the infamous Star Wars Holiday Special in 1978, where he was touted to be a new character from the upcoming sequel to Star Wars. Shortly thereafter, he became the first ever mail-away action figure offered by Kenner, where he was promised to have a major role in The Empire Strikes Back. And though he may not have had a huge role, much like Phasma and Maul eventually wouldn't, he did play a major part in that movie by being the one who tracked down the Millennium Falcon and was directly responsible for the capture of Han Solo and his friends. Not to mention, he gets away with the frozen Han in the end, which subverted the expectations of viewers at that time. But this alone didn't turn Boba Fett into the fan favorite he is today, nor was it the fact that he looked pretty damn cool in his Mandalorian armor, far better than just a chromed up stormtrooper with a cape. Though, interestingly enough, Boba Fett was initially going to be a lot like Captain Phasma in that he was basically going to be a super trooper who wore special all-white armor that would distinguish him from regular stormtroopers. Thankfully, though, they moved away from that idea and made him a bounty hunter, or I highly doubt he'd be the Star Wars icon he is today. But what exactly is it that made him such an icon? Why was there just this common belief after The Empire Strikes Back that he was such a badass? Sure, part of it again goes back to the fact that he does outsmart Han and leads the Empire right to him. But I think what really cements Boba as such an awesome character is that Darth Vader himself clearly has a lot of respect for him. Because when we first meet Boba Fett, along with the other 5 bounty hunters, it's only Fett that Darth Vader singles out to say something to personally. And what does he say to him after declaring that he wants Solo and the rest of the occupants of the Falcon alive? Is that there are to be no disintegrations. To which Boba Fett casually says back, "As you wish." And what this says to the audience, even if you might not consciously think about it, is that not only has Fett worked for Vader before, but he defied Vader and disintegrated someone he clearly shouldn't have. And not only did Vader not kill him for this failure or his insolence, and we've seen Vader kill his own officers for seemingly less in this very movie, he's actually asking Fett to work for him again here, which shows Vader has a ton of respect for what Fett is capable of. Then, later in the movie, Fett openly questions Vader about putting Solo into carbonite because he might lose his valuable prize. But instead of any kind of smart or subtly threatening answer from Vader, like Lando gets when he openly questions Vader, Fett instead gets promised compensation in case anything goes wrong. This is yet another subtle sign that Vader has respect for Fett and values him as an asset he can go to again. In other words, even though Fett isn't in the movie a whole lot, and he's not seen doing much when he is, it's the respect he receives from Darth Vader that I believe has a lot to do with why fans just assumed he was such an incredible bounty hunter. Not to mention, Boba Fett just flat out wins in this movie. He's hired to do a job, and he ends up doing it and doing it well. Phasma, however, doesn't really do anything noteworthy in The Force Awakens to elevate our opinion of the character, either consciously or subconsciously. Early in the movie, she reminds Kylo Ren about the villagers, which prompts him to give the order to kill them, and then she's the one that sees to it that the stormtroopers actually carry out said order, which I guess is supposed to make her come off as heartless and evil. Soon after this, she chastises Finn for taking off his helmet, which I guess is supposed to be enough to set up some sort of rivalry between them that'll come to fruition later in the movie when Finn, Han, and Chewie capture her. Problem is, there's no real type of conflict when that actually happens. Chewie tackles her easily enough. Finn antagonizes her for a little bit, and then when a blaster is put to her head, Phasma just immediately rolls over and lowers the shield, and then they dump her in a trash compactor, officially rendering the character as a joke, at least in the context of this movie. Because if you read the aforementioned Phasma book, you learn she is just the type of person who will do whatever it takes to survive, even betraying those she seemingly cares about like her own family. And again, I do highly recommend reading that book. It's one of the more interesting Star Wars books I've ever read, and has a very Mad Max meets Star Wars feel to it. Anyway, my point here is that a great character doesn't necessarily require a lot of screen time, or doesn't have to do a bunch of amazing things to sell them or endear them to the audience. Rather, it tends to be the nuance and the subtlety that truly makes them great. Yoda, again from The Empire Strikes Back, is another character that is written so well that even if he hadn't lifted Luke's X-Wing out of the swamp, we would just know that he is a great, wise, and powerful character. And this kind of writing has been severely lacking in the sequel trilogy, as is highlighted by the character Captain Phasma, who again, in the context of the movies of course, is just an empty set of shiny armor. And the further irony here is that both Phasma and Boba Fett get about the same amount of screen time and meet very similar fates in the second movies they're in, though at least Phasma does get a pretty decent fight scene with Finn before being bested by a sneak attack from him. Whereas Fett, however, is accidentally bested by Han Solo, who triggers his jetpack and sends him crashing into Jabba's sail barge before he falls into the Sarlacc pit. And the reason why many people were upset when Boba Fett went out like a chump in Return of the Jedi is because the previous movie had been able to subtly form an illusion of greatness around him, whereas the previous movie had done nothing for Captain Phasma, but show she was seemingly a coward and a traitor, so when she died, no one really cared. And the sad part in all of this is that I really think J.J. Abrams and company thought Phasma would be the next Boba Fett, the next character that would look cool and despite a relatively small part, would resonate with fans and become popular. But what they forgot is that there has to be a reason to like a character that goes beyond just looking cool. And yes, as many others have pointed out before, there was one huge missed opportunity to do something with Phasma by having her fight Finn while on Takodana, instead of him fighting a random stormtrooper. Though, for what it's worth, the trooper was later revealed to be Nines, a former squad mate of Finn's. But let's be real here, that's not what they were thinking when they filmed that scene. They weren't thinking, hey, it'd be cool if Finn fought a former squad mate here who called him a traitor. Instead, making him Nines was retroactive. It was a decision made after the movie came out in the hopes that it would help cover up the fact that they missed a chance to do something useful with Phasma. Just like the book Phasma, though indeed a great book, was written solely to explain why Phasma lowered the shields in The Force Awakens without putting up some kind of fight. It was an attempt to hopefully salvage a character so that Rian Johnson could do almost nothing with her in The Last Jedi until the end of the movie, where she was just bested by Finn. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think. Why is Boba Fett so beloved by the fans? And what do you think about Phasma? Have you read her book? Let me know in the comments below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.